Let's go. Break it down. Put it there. Bring it on. Step it up. Right there. Break it down. Put it there. Here we go. Step it up. Bring it on. Let's go.
Hi everyone and welcome to this Studium Generale program, Getting Your Life Back with a Corona app, in which we will be discussing the use of technology and in particular an app for helping us in the fight against the coronavirus. You are joining us today for our first online interview. And my name is Marle de Jonge and I am a program maker for Studium Generale. We are part of the Technical University here in Eindhoven. And today we are live streaming on YouTube and on Facebook. And it is also possible today for you to ask questions to our speaker. For this, you can use the chat function in YouTube and the comments section in Facebook. And we always like to get to know you a little bit better. So I thought perhaps it would be nice to share with us in the chat what you are looking forward to now that the corona restrictions are slowly being relaxed a little bit. What is one thing that you are looking forward to doing after 1st of June? We would be interested in hearing about that. We will also be using Mentimeter today. You can find the code here in the live stream, and we will be using it at some point during the interview. Technical questions can also be addressed in the chat function, and then one of my colleagues will address them. We are here today with no other than Marjolein Lanzing. We're very happy that she can join us in the live stream. She is a philosopher who studies the ethical concerns of new technologies, and she's currently working as a postdoc at the Radboud University in Nijmegen. But she's also very well acquainted with our own university in Eindhoven, because last year she defended her PhD thesis in Eindhoven, which was called The Transparent Self, in which she addresses the drawbacks of the digital era. She's also a board member of the NGO Bits of Freedom that advocates for online freedom and digital rights. Welcome, Marjolein. I would like to invite you to join me in the live stream.
Hi, Marla. Thanks for
inviting me. How are you doing?
Good, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good too. So I thought it would be nice to start, Marjolein, with the press conference that we had yesterday. Another of many press conferences, of course, but one in which there was surprisingly perhaps no mention at all of the Corona app that we had heard so much about this was mid-April, so a month ago, when Mr. Hugo de Jonge was actually presenting this as one of the major solutions towards fighting the coronavirus. What did you feel about this? Had you expected it to show up in the press conference?
No, of course not. No, because we while the Corona app was presented as a solution at the start, it slowly sort of went away quietly after a giant societal backlash against the idea of implementing a Corona app or developing a Corona app. And so now it's only mentioned in terms of a support system that may support other exit strategies, but it's no longer the solution for tackling the Corona crisis. And there's another reason, because Minister Hugo de Jonge is currently in his own kitchen cooking up his own version of the Corona app with a dream team that was put together based on the appathon that was held a couple of weeks ago. And so the sort of top developers, the key people from that appathon were sort of selected as a sort of dream team. And now they're sort of trying to come up with something together.
Yeah, so to summarize that bit of things that happened in April, so basically there was an appathon for all kinds of companies to participate in, right?
Yes.
And then they had the weekend in which there was a lot of discussion with a lot of specialized people.
Yeah.
And there was no real result. That was my impression as a layperson. Like, Yeah, there was no one that really won that appathon or something.
No. Nobody
Oh.
won. Nobody won the appathon.
Was it that bad, or what happened there?
Nah, it's not. So, okay. So the idea of the appathon was, in some, in some ways of the word, or in some senses, it could be considered actually very brave and democratic. So it was a way of. Kicking off in a very speedy fashion the construction of a Corona app, or the development of a Corona app. So the government invited companies to submit proposals for a Corona app. And there were lots of companies that did so. I think there were over 700 proposals that the government received. And then based on those proposals, a committee of experts would select the most promising submissions. And so what went wrong? The experts that made the initial selection weren't provided with any criteria, so they were invited to make a selection. And read through all of the proposals, but there were no guidelines, no criteria whatsoever. And eventually, 7 Corona apps were sort of the prize-winning apps, the most promising apps that were put forward. But then the experts that were part of the selection procedure said, well. We cannot support the 7 results because
Any of them, right? Yeah.
any of them, because we don't know how this selection of 7 apps came about, because we didn't propose any of them, or at least some of them. So they said we don't want to be associated with results at all. But nevertheless, there was an appathon in which all the 7 apps were presented by the different developers, and the cool part of the appathon was that anyone with an interest in the topic could follow the live stream and ask questions and to the developers, and they had to answer those. So that was really interesting, of course, and also I think that's actually a very cool aspect of the appathon. But at the same time, it also became clear very quickly that many of the proposals for Corona apps weren't sufficiently effective, or had privacy issues, or hadn't been thought through in other ways. And there was one particular app, for instance, that uploaded their bron code, their source code, and it turned out that like 200 email addresses and other personal information were also uploaded. So there was data leak already, like before we had even started with the
painful.
whole. Quite painful. Yeah. So there were, in many ways, the appathon was not such a big success.
But then you say, so Hugo de Jonge, from like the top people from that appathon, he created his own dream team.
Yeah, so the idea was to invite developers from the appathon that had promising ideas, to sort of collect them and put them together in a sort of an ultimate dream team, and that they would try to come up with a different Corona app, constructed on the side, actually, or behind closed doors.
Do you think they're still working on that?
I believe they still are, because but of course the weight of the idea has been sort of
so I guess we're fortunate in the sense that the number of infections is decreasing anyway. So the urgency of the app is a little less at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And so the importance of the app is not it's not framed in terms of a solution or a wholesale solution, but in terms of a support system rather than the wholesale solution, which is good, I think. And it's interesting. Some information has already been communicated with the public, and one of the ideas that came out was that they're going to use the infrastructure provided by Google and Apple as a basis for the Corona app that they're developing. So that's one of the few things that the public knows at this point about the Corona.
I think that's something we we can get back to a bit later in the interview about your views on whether that's a good thing or not. First of all, perhaps it's interesting to talk a little bit about the topic that is pretty much always first on everyone's mind when they hear things like this, which is privacy, and which is also a topic that you've studied a lot at TU Eindhoven. So can you define for us exactly what is privacy exactly?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it's very difficult to define privacy. I think so. I think the most widely used conceptualization or definition of privacy is the idea that we can control to some extent what information other people have access to about us, and to what extent. So it's called the sort of the control access definition. It's the most basic definition, I think. And there's many ways of then using that definition for thinking about what privacy means, what the value of privacy is, and so on. So you can take this up in a very individualized sense. You can say, okay, if the definition is that we can control to some extent what information other people have about us and who those people are and to what extent they have information about us, that means that the individual is completely responsible for what goes on in terms of information exchange, or should be responsible in terms of in control about their information. And it might give a very limited idea about how we should protect our privacy. So, for instance, people could say, okay, then we can ensure privacy as long as people are informed about what's going on. So think about the cookie disclaimer. This website is using cookies. Do you accept? And if you say, yes, I accept, it means you are aware of what's going on, and you give permission that the website collects your data, and then that's it. Now, and there's also other ways of looking at privacy that are more social, where you say, well, privacy has aside from being an individual right and being about individual control, it also protects and relates the relationships, protects the relationships we have with other people. So for that,
you say privacy protects our relationships with other people.
Yeah. Okay. So to give you an example, when we have a private conversation or an intimate conversation with our friends, this is information we don't want to, for instance, share with our parents or the state. So my love life, for instance, is of no business to my parents or the state. By creating this intimacy with a close friend or my partner, we protect the meaningfulness of our relationship. As soon as someone else drops into our conversation and becomes a part of it or intrudes, the meaningfulness of that relationship at that point becomes deteriorated or less meaningful or problematized. So I always give the example where I say, okay, when you're with your best friend at home and you're having a conversation about who she's met in the club or who she's hanging out with or having a love affair with, and your mom drops in with a cup of tea, what will happen? Well, you'll both stop the conversation and you'll wait until she's gone. You won't talk about your love interests or whatsoever, personal stuff. It's a very, maybe it's very small, but a very, I think, well-known instance of what could happen when people intrude upon your intimate relationships. But there's also other examples. So, for instance, the information that I share with my doctor as a patient is protected within that particular relationship. So I divulge information to my doctor, and my doctor safe keeps it, and he won't or she won't pass it on to, for instance, a healthcare insurance agency. Now, So there is a sense of, there's an aspect of individual control there, but there's also the realization that that what we how we exchange information, or what we accept in terms of information sharing, has an impact on different types of relationships that we uphold with other people. So privacy allows us to separate between different types of social contexts. That's what it actually comes down to. It allows us to have a relationship with the state that is very particular,
Yeah.
a relationship with our employer, a relationship with our doctor, a relationship with our friends, a relationship with our parents, our colleagues. And well, there's a myriad of relationships, and how everybody deals with information within these relationships, that's up to you. But that we need those types of social boundaries, that's something that we all can, to some extent, agree to.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
and when we look at privacy specifically in this situation with the Corona app, what are your greatest concerns or worries?
So I guess that the way we look at privacy right now, when we talk about the Corona app, is very much about. So let me phrase it differently. The opposition that we see a lot in the public debate when we talk about the Corona app is, okay, should we sacrifice our individual privacy for the collective good of health or public health? So lots of people will say something. So I'm currently doing research with the University of Vienna, and we conduct interviews with lots of people from the Netherlands and France and Germany. And when we ask them, would you install a Corona app? They will say something like, yes, of course we will, because it's a way to improve the general health or the public health. And I've got nothing to hide. Or something like, well, the government already has all of our information, so yeah, let's install it, and then maybe we'll have some other freedoms that we can gain.
But perhaps it would be nice at this point, because we have the Mentimeter.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Just to check if what the sentiment is among the people viewing. If my colleague would be able to put the Mentimeter screen. There we go. You can find us on menti.com and then put in the code 172249. Or you can use the direct link that is in the chat and in the description below the video. And perhaps we can already put the first question in the Mentimeter. Which is basically what you said, Marjolein. I've got nothing to hide anyway. They know all about me already.
Yeah.
So, yeah, why not? What's the problem with the app, basically?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's see that we have one person who agrees so far. And 12 people who disagree. I know that one of the people who agrees is actually one of our colleagues, who says, I'm using Facebook, I'm using, I'm using so much technology already that is able to know quite a lot about me.
Yeah.
But it's very functional, so, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
We now have 3 people who agree and 15 people who disagree.
Okay.
So
I'm preaching to the choir now.
Basically, yeah, which is perhaps sort of, pre-selecting the people who will view this live stream are probably already a little inclined to be skeptical about these issues.
It's still interesting, because a couple of years ago, I think lots of people would have hit the agree button, I think. But
it's also the sentiment in society as a whole, probably, that has shifted a little since, perhaps a lot of Facebook incidents and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, and but it's still interesting also in like with regard to the interviews I'm currently conducting, that many people that I interview actually have no problem at all installing a Corona app.
Yeah.
Um,
Maybe we can have one more question in Mentimeter. If we can show the next one, which is also drawing a little bit on what you were saying, Marjolein, about well, kind of the struggle between health and privacy. So our question to the viewers is, or our statement, health is more important than privacy. Do you agree or disagree? I think in the end on our previous slide, 4 people agreed with you from 20. So still almost 25%. Well, there are actually at this point more people agreeing with the statement that health is more important than privacy. Give you a bit more time to respond. Okay, so it's almost 50-50, but 10 people agree and 8 people disagree.
Yeah.
So is that what you see in your interviews as well, that the health is valued very highly?
Yeah. So that's also the reason. So why most people also say, well, let's install an app. Someone even said, I don't care, install an app, implant a chip in my body, give me a vaccine or an injection. I don't care. I'll take anything. So, but I mean, that shows how important that value is of health. And also something that came up in relation to it was the economy. So there were also people who were willing to, so you can also put something else there, right? Say the economy is more important than privacy.
I see someone has already put in the comments that they think it's this dichotomy between health and privacy is a false one.
Yes.
Yes. You agree. So why is it?
Yeah. So it's actually it's a mean question. The one is health more important than privacy? Because well, I've argued several times, but that this dichotomy is a false one, because privacy in many ways is well, it should be conceived as a social value rather than an small individual right. So that's the first statement. So when we say health or public health is more important than privacy, it's usually when people say that, it's because they think that health is a collective good and that privacy is only the small individual right that we should give up if we want to be solidary with the common good.
Okay.
Or with so this with same
society
frame
as a whole.
Society as a whole. Yeah. So this similar frame you see in debates about privacy versus safety, for instance. So when there has been a terrorist attack and people were asked, do you want to give up your privacy if we can prevent deaths in a terrorist attack? Then people say, of course, they're very willing. They're willing to do so, and they're even willing to give up very fundamental or basic freedoms for achieving that goal. So, and it has also something to do with the way we frame health and safety, because in health, the victims, and just like with safety, it's very the victims the victims of terrorism or a virus. They're very concrete, so we know what we're giving up something for. Now, and I think so. One part of the argumentation is that we need to understand that privacy isn't this small individual or individualistic luxury right, but that it's actually protecting something very, very, very important, which is a free, liberal democracy. And that sounds really abstract, especially when you live in a liberal democracy. Yeah. You're like, you don't know what you're defending because we've already gotten so used to.
I prefer being healthy. basically.
Yeah, I prefer being healthy
yeah.
because we don't know what we're missing, so to say. But of course, this freedom and this and the privacy that protects it. Well, we've gone to war for it. We've defended it. We've even made a fundamental human right out of privacy. And but of course, it's more abstract to defend.
Yeah.
So people often ask for concrete cases of privacy violations, for instance. And I always try to avoid that a little bit. I always try to argue that you should perceive it from a more social perspective. So I guess that one of the key insights about privacy is that privacy is an antidote against power abuse. So it may seem that health should be prioritized in a sort of hierarchy, but there are, of course, many different values that we should protect at the same time, and that also hang together. Health is not only your physical health; it also means general well-being, or your. Now we already see it now. Like health is also mental health. It's also the sense of belonging to a community and have healthy social relationships. So it also means it also depends on how you interpret health, how you see the balance, so to say.
And you mentioned the topic power, which is perhaps interesting when we look at what you are currently researching in Nijmegen, which is your project is called the Googlization of Health, right?
Yeah.
So you already mentioned that Hugo de Jong is now planning on using software of Apple and Google. Mm-hmm. So here we have a few very well-known big tech companies that are very interested in and invested in our health. Mm-hmm. What do you think about this development?
I think it's a development that we have to be very careful of. So let's just assume that the Corona app will, because we don't know what the Corona app will look like, but let's just assume that it involves collecting biometric data, so data about your body, your temperature, your physiological state, and about your location. So that's very sensitive data that you're disclosing. What we want to avoid is that this type of data ends up with people who can use it as a means of power, or that it creates somehow a power imbalance between citizens and state, or consumers and big companies. Now, with respect to the Googlization of health, we're worried about the role that big tech is increasingly playing in the realm of public health. So we see a trend where the big five, so Amazon, Facebook, Google, Apple, and Microsoft, are increasingly investing in health information and healthcare products and public health facilities. So
why are they so interested?
Because just like most people just said that they think health is more important than privacy, we all worry very much about our health, and so we're willing to do almost anything for our health, whatever health means. But that means that there's a big market in health information, so you can make a lot of money in the lifestyle and health departments. So, but this is the one interpretation of why they're collecting so much health information. I mean, if you would ask them, they would say something like, "We want to advance public health or global health goals."
And which is also like, I mean, there must be a reason why Hugo de Jonge decided I will use Apple and Google, because their systems are, of course, very effective and work very well.
Yes.
Right?
So that has to do with the fact that, of course, these companies have been working in the field of artificial intelligence and algorithms, big data for a very long time. And they have the best experts, they have the most money, monopoly on lots of ideas in that realm, so to say. So I mean, that's also oh yeah, I'll get back to that later. But so for a government, it's very nice if, for instance, Google or Apple offers an infrastructure where they can just plug in, they can use to plug in a Corona app that they develop, because it at least will mean, for instance, that the Corona app will run smoothly on a smartphone or an iPhone.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it also seems very sympathetic, right? And I mean, to some extent, it is. These Apple and Google have worked together for a while to create an infrastructure that can be implemented on smartphones and iPhones that will allow each country to develop one Corona app that can be plugged into that infrastructure, which will ensure, or at least not ensure necessarily, but which will make it more likely that the app will be more effective or smooth running and so on. Now, also these companies are very well known, so there's also a reputation thing going on, or an image thing. It's also sort of cool to work together with Google and Apple on this, on a fancy app.
And I see someone also points out that they have access to parts of our phone that only they can access, basically. So
exactly,
to have the full functionality.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because prior to to this API that they developed, for instance, I think it was even the TU Delft that already worked on a Corona app months ago, like 2 months ago or something. They started working on something like that, but they couldn't get it functional because, there were all kinds of glitches, and the app wasn't able to run very smoothly because it didn't easily connect to the software of smartphones and iPhones.
So it's almost unavoidable to use them, it sounds.
No, that's no.
Okay,
Okay, so that's an interesting remark. Yeah, well, to some extent, it's almost unavoidable. Just like it's almost unavoidable to use WhatsApp or Google Drive or all these programs that we already rely on. So. But it's not completely impossible. And actually, I agree with Marjolein Sticker from the Waag Society. She's written this really great book, The Internet is Stuk, for the Dutch-speaking
so the internet is broken. Yeah.
The internet is broken. And she actually says, well, we should really combat the general, or sort of the... should we say, the reliance on these big tech companies, because we tend to rely on them in almost every social domain right now. And she advocates and argues that we should invest, and the government should invest in independent developers that do not have a major commercial aim or are part of these big tech firms. And so
do you think that that's feasible, knowing what we know now, that the big tech companies are so experienced? It's quite a giant to fight, basically.
Yes, it is. And so we're already very far. We're already very dependent on them. So it will require serious and organized and structural government policies and action to ensure that other or independent developers are subsidized, or but there's ways you could do that, of course. Marjolein Sticker argues that, for instance, that the government could, for instance, issue that schools do not use Google education systems, but that the government and even forbids maybe the use of these applications. And instead develop independent learning tools or education tools.
Maybe it's interesting to check once more what our viewers feel would be the best solution for this. So then we move back to the Mentimeter for 2 more questions. If you have the link still open, you should be able to see the next question soon. And that question is an open question. And the question is simple: who do you think should develop the app? maybe incorporating what we've just heard, the pros and cons. We're curious to know if you prefer the big tech or the independent Marjolein Sticker-like construction. I have to say, I don't see any response. There's the first response. We have a bit of a delay, so that's why sometimes we have to be a little patient.
Yeah.
So here someone says a multidisciplinary team of independent researchers and developers, which my guess is sounds quite appealing to you.
Very appealing, yeah.
Open source, Marjolein Sticker, independent parties, government controlled by the people.
Yeah.
It's also interesting. Dutch society. So I guess it's also a matter of trust, right? Who do you trust with your data?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and that's that's something. It's also something we ask during the interviews. Like, would you rather trust the government or corporations with your data? And then, interestingly, most people say, well, I'd rather trust the government than corporations. Which is so that there is a sense in which people say, okay, yeah, there is something wrong with Google collecting all of my biometric information about like my temperature or the diseases I may have or won't have, and because we don't really know what they're going to do with it. Maybe governments can be held more accountable. At the same time, we also know governments elsewhere on the planet that really abuse your biometric information or your location data. But in the Netherlands, maybe, you could set something up that limits the government power and gives it back to, or at least distributes it across citizens, where we have access as the public to data. The commons.
I see government is showing up a lot now.
Yeah.
Not Google, Apple. Diverse team of experts. That's perhaps also an interesting one. Who do you think should be part of such a team?
I agree completely with the anonymous crowd that has suggested the diverse team of experts. So what you see right now is that so in the team of Hugo de Jonge, the experts that were consulted or are consulted, they're mostly people from ICT and or commercial or corporate domains. And also almost all of them are men. And no offense to men, but it would be nice if there is like a more
diversity in
every sense of the word, because this could be a different
also
debate.
Women suffer from corona.
And there's differences in how we experience technology. So that's like that. So when you ask people what they think, you should try to create a nice diverse panel of stakeholders or experts. But let's get back to at least the expertise.
The background, maybe,
So I think that in developing a Corona app, it's not only about how you can technically arrange or develop the app, but you should also invite sociologists who can say something about social dynamics. You should ask philosophers or ethicists who can say something about the ethics of implementing a surveillance system or privacy. And there's maybe anthropologists or of course, computer science is often asked. Very important. In our center at iHub, we collaborate with computer scientists, sociologists, legal scholars, philosophers, anthropologists. So it's like a very nice mix of different people, and we can communicate very well amongst each other. We don't always understand each other,
but not always a given, right?
That's not a given.
It's quite different worlds that have to be merged.
Yes, definitely. But it's definitely possible. And I think it also results in very interesting discussions and insights about what you can or should do when you design technology. Technology is not something on its own. I think that's something that comes up a lot in the debate. It seems like if we only develop the technology or design the technology, we can just unleash it on society and it will do its thing, whatever that is. But technology is not something that we should unleash on society in an isolated sense. It's always connected to social relationships. It should be embedded within policy, in laws, in laws and regulations, in all sorts of it's not something on its own. It's part of a network of different social aspects. So if you invite experts, yes, it should be a multidisciplinary team, and as diverse as possible.
Okay, Marjolein, I see we have 5 minutes left. Time is flying. So perhaps in the last 5 minutes it would be interesting to discuss. I mean, there's so much to discuss, of course, but how such an app would affect society, because that's something we haven't maybe heard so much about, but that people do have a lot of questions about, like how to use it, if it's a voluntary thing or not. What are your main considerations there, or your main concerns?
So one of the main concerns I have is that the app may be coerced in ways that we do not foresee right now. So Hugo de Jonge has promised that the app would be voluntary, so it won't be obligated, like an obligation to install it.
At least not from the government.
No, not like in India, not like in China, and so on. It would be a voluntary step to install the app. But then, you would really have to specify what voluntary means. And already, as a government, I think you have a responsibility there to really ensure that something is voluntary, because there's many ways to manipulate people into using an app, or coercing people into using an app. So one of the things I worry about is, for instance, that supermarkets or your employer or the school you're going to, the university, that they were going to require to download the app and to show that you're clean before you can get back to work, or before you can access a restaurant or the supermarket. And of course, there's differences in places that are essential to or necessary for leading our lives. But I think we should be really careful that becomes a social practice, and that it also becomes sort of an unwritten rule that you show each other, or that people then go and expect that people say, well, I'm clean, we can hang out, or I can come back to work, I'm clean.
So how do you prevent that? Because it feels like a very natural thing that, for example, restaurants or schools or dentists or something, that they will say, okay, you can come, but show us that you're not infected or something.
Yeah. So they already ask you, right, on the phone, like whether you're clean or not. And I think to some extent that makes it makes sense. But it's that's not technologically mediated or something. What you want to prevent is that people, because now we still don't know what the Corona app is going to look like, but suppose such an app would actually collect your data or store it somewhere in a I don't know, maybe a central on a central server or whatsoever. Or there could be many reasons why you wouldn't want to install such an app. Then you have the right not to install it, and it shouldn't have the consequence shouldn't be that you cannot participate in society, or that you cannot.
Because there are also people who don't have a smartphone.
That's like even the basic step. Not everybody owns a smartphone or wants to own a smartphone, or knows how to use it, or has an informed idea about what's going on with a smartphone or an app or the use of it, and so on. So there's many steps before that, for sure. But in any case, I think we shouldn't take it for granted that being tracked and and disclosing very sensitive information about yourself becomes a very normalized social practice in order to be able to participate in society.
Do you think there's also peer pressure at some point for, you kind of have to, like with vaccination, right? You kind of have to vaccinate yourself for the greater good. You kind of have to use the app for the greater good.
Yeah. So I think you have to be very careful with what you're unleashing again. So you have to be very aware that these types of social dynamics can actually be an outcome of introducing such an app into society. One of the more old school examples is the click line. It's not even sure.
It's a phone line for.
It's a phone line
cheating
for
on people.
Yeah, it's a reporting line. It's like a telltale line, where you can snitch on your neighbors if they don't uphold the 1.5 meter distance or something. There's one in Purmerend that already had like 115 what is it?
Calling in.
People calling in, yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah. And but so installing something like that can be a very I think you should be really, really careful. It undermines solidarity in many respects. Solidarity is very fragile. It's something that we create together, and it relies, again, as you said, also it relies on trust and trusting each other. And when you install snitching technologies, whether it's like an old school one or that we also know from the Stasi era, or a very high tech one. We have to be very careful on how this impacts our social interactions and what the consequences are, because they're very difficult to turn back. When it's normalized to demand information of people, or to check on them, or to spy on them, or to snitch on them, that's not good for the social fabric and for trust in a free democratic society. Okay. Yeah,
I see someone comments on YouTube how to prevent it. Just not make the app. It's too risky. What is your outlook on how the Corona app, or say a future health app? Because of course Corona will pass, but some other occurrence will also show up where an app would again be useful.
Yeah.
What is your view? How do you see it develop in, say, the next 5 to 10 years or something?
Yeah, I think we should be really, really, really careful. There have been a lot of countries that have already developed an app and are using it at the moment. And there's so many concerns, privacy concerns, concerns about voluntariness, about monopolists that are involved, about solidarity. And I think there's sort of course, there was this urgent moment where the ministers thought, like, we have to really be fast and develop an app quickly.
Yeah.
And I think that's always, I mean, I get it, but building a technology like that, a surveillance tool like that, it takes a lot of time if you want it to be somewhat ethical or meet ethical standards, and also effective, like the basis of course, like we've been discussing everything beyond effectiveness. We've assumed that you can build an effective app, but that's also something that we should still see, right? So even the basis is unclear. And then there's of course also the legal system right now. Lots of laws prohibit many uses of such an app, so you would have to rethink certain laws before you can even introduce an app like that. So maybe just to summarize it, I'm very skeptical that you can build something like that in such a short amount of time. And I think if you want to build an app still, then it will take a lot of time. You'll have to go through all these ethical concerns, and before you end up, and that requires a public debate, because that's what we do in a democracy. We debate and we discuss these things together before we implement something that impacts our lives in such a significant way. So for now, I would say, we should leave it or think about it, but then in a more structured democratic procedure where we can all give input and think about this in a constructive and way with this great team of a multidisciplinary team of experts. And
So maybe as a very final question, I apologize for running a little late, but so much to discuss. Do you think there are other ways in which technology could be more functional in this crisis rather than an app? We've seen the dashboard that Hugo de Jonge discussed in the press conference last night.
Yeah.
Is that the way to go, or?
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure yet. That's all very new. it might be interesting if we collect data or just assemble data that was already publicly available to show or to look at what areas are might be or may have more infections and so on, or and can have lesser or more freedom with regards to the measures. I'm not sure. I only know that I think that lots of people are unsure about this, of course. I think testing is really important. Just we have lots of institutions, of course, very good healthcare institutions that already have their own struggles with privacy and all kinds of ethical dilemmas on their own, but that are democratically put together. And so maybe we should rely on them and strengthening those institutions, those social institutions first. And then if there's an app, it should be for supporting those types of institutions instead of being a wholesale solution. I'm not sure what will be next, and I'm very curious to see what people come up with, and happy to think along also with whatever technological or new technological ideas come up. Yeah,
I guess at least academically, it's a very interesting time for you to be studying this this health crisis.
Yes, to say the least. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Okay. And, Marjolein, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today. Thanks for sharing your views on the Corona app and its potential and its potential problems. Thank you all online for joining us today. In the chat function, you can find a link to a questionnaire where you could provide us with feedback on today's lecture. We always very much appreciate it. And I can reveal that next week we will be back on Wednesday with no other than Frank Lammers, famous Dutch actor, and we will discuss with him the role of culture in Corona times. So we hope to see you back next week, and thanks for joining us today. Goodbye.